Association, and you're dialed in on this design webinar that we're going to be doing today on what is the die casting process. I believe this is the first in a three-part series. And before we get started into today's content, as people continue to trickle in on the line, I just want to make sure that everyone knows how to participate today. And so what you're going to see on your left-hand side is a viewer, and this is where you're going to see everything that I'm showing on my screen. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see some sort of a control panel that you can use to interact with me throughout today's webinar. First off, normally we like to maximize the screen so we can see the most possible. And so if you want to just click on this orange button, you can always hide this control panel. And if you ever need to bring it back to ask a question or something along those lines, feel free to click it again, and it'll come right back for you. You also have an option to do an auto hide feature and other things, so be sure to explore this control panel as we go along through today's webinar if you have any to configure the desktop however you would like. In terms of your audio setup, it looks like most people on today's line are using just speakers and microphones on their computers. If you have any trouble with this, feel free to click on this audio setup button, and the audio setup button will let you view and select and test your speakers on your computer to make sure that you're at least able to hear us well. If you have any other problems with your audio, or you have a question pertaining to how the audio works, feel free to ask a question in the questions pane. If you do use your telephone, just keep in mind that it's really helpful if you use this audio pin. And what that audio pin will do will give us control of your phone on our end. By default, everyone will be muted, and that keeps the line nice and quiet for everybody so you can focus on the content and not have to hear other people breathing and coughing in the background. And so at the end of the webinar, when we do have a time for questions and answers, you'll want to have this audio pin available in case you want to be unmuted. However, we have found in our efforts in these webinars that it's typically best to just ask your questions through this questions pane. And then when we get to periods when I can take a break and answer any of your questions, I'll just read the questions off and try to answer them as best I can. If I'm really not getting your question, or if I haven't quite addressed it exactly how you'd like, feel free to click on this raise your hand button, and that'll let me know that I haven't answered your question satisfactorily, and I'll go ahead and unmute your phone at that point, and then you can actually speak to us. Keep in mind that if you're just listening to this webinar on the speakers on your laptop or your desktop computer, you may not have a microphone built in, and so we won't be able to hear you. Just keep that in mind. Like I said, we're going to stick very tightly to a 1-hour schedule, and our goal there is just to make sure that we respect everybody's time on this line. However, if there are a bunch of questions when we get to the end, we should have 5 or 10 minutes for questions at the end of this hour period. However, if you have more questions or there's a lot of discussion continuing to go on, we will stick around for additional questions. Just keep in mind that you don't need to stick around for all the questions at the end of today's webinar. And so with that, I want to get in and give you a little bit of background about NADCA and what we do, just so you can understand where we fit in this whole die-casting trade association world. The North American Diecasting Association, or NADCA for short, we're really the industry trade association for die casters, suppliers to the die-casting industry, and consumers of die castings. And our primary goal here is to educate, to do research and development to advance the industry, and to continue to grow the die-casting industry, specifically in North America. And so one of the reasons we do webinars like we are doing today is just to try to fulfill this goal of educating, where we're going to be educating consumers of die castings to try to help you guys know how best to utilize the die casting process. Now, towards that goal, we have also set up a website called diecastingdesign.org, and most everything that we're going to talk about today and on the next 2 webinars in this series you'll find actually on this website, as well as additional information beyond just what we have covered in these next 2 webinars in the next week and a half. And so you'll see topics such as how do I do the product development, how do I do the part design, how do I choose an alloy. There's also the ability to get some instant support by just contacting NADCA directly. You can also get a copy of our standards. And there's a lot of other resources there, including just a resource to search and find die casters to make your components. Pushing further along, if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of designing a die casting, eventually you're going to have to find standards to reference in the production of your part. And NADCA does publish a standard. We're on a 3-year update cycle, so 2012 was the most recent update of our product and specification standards for die castings. And this is somewhat of a unique standard because it doesn't just address what tolerances are available in the die casting process, but it has standards on, what levels of heat check can I accept, how do I build a tool, what do I need to specify when I build a tool, among a host of other topics. And so I highly encourage you to take a look at this standard. In fact, you can get an electronic copy of the standard by just going to diecastingdesign.org/publications, and there you just enter your name and email address essentially, and you will get a copy of the standard. So why would we pick die casting, and